morning and welcome to our service this morning. Reading from Psalm chapter 40. I waited patiently for the Lord. He turned to me and heard my cry. He lifted me out of the slimy pit, out of the mud and mire. He set my feet on a rock and gave me a firm place to stand. He put a new song in my mouth, a hymn of praise to our God. Many will see and fear the Lord and put their trust in him. Thanks be to God for his word. Now this morning we will be looking at obedience and the call to be obedient. And it's easy to be obedient when times are good. It's easy to be obedient when things are fantastic, but when life gets difficult, when we find ourselves in as it describes it in the psalm, in a slimy pit, it's difficult to put our trust in someone other than ourselves. And yet that's the obedience we're called to, is we're called to be obedient, to put our trust in God, is to stand firm in his foundation even when life is difficult. And so may we be like the heroes of old, like the Daniel in the Bible. May we learn to trust, to follow through, to be obedient. May we follow God, follow Jesus in everything we do, with our bodies, minds, hearts, and souls. May we stand firm in the God who loves us. Amen.
I've heard 1,000 stories of what they think you're like, but I've heard the tender whisper of love in the dead of night, and you tell me that you're pleased and that I'm never alone. You're a good, good Father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are, and I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. And I've seen many searching for answers far and wide, but I know we're all searching for answers only you provide, 'cause you know just what we need before we say a word. You're a good, good Father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are, and I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways to us. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways to us. Love so undeniable, I can hardly speak. And peace so unexplainable, I can hardly think as you call me. Deeper still as you call me. Deeper still as you call me. Deeper
and welcome again to our service. As we continue in worship, we continue by exploring the sermon series that we are currently in, Audacious Faith. We have been looking at the life of Daniel, and I hope that you have been enjoying it as much as I have. Today, the specific theme we are going to be honing in on is how Daniel was fearless. And I absolutely love this topic. I need this topic desperately in my life, and I pray that it will come to mean something to you too as we look at the life of Daniel. Fear is a strange thing. Fear does strange things to us. It causes us to react and respond in illogical ways. I'm not sure if I'm alone, but I do very, very strange things when I'm afraid. One of the things that I've recently become aware of within the last 2 or 3 years of my life is that when I'm afraid, for some reason, I'm instantly triggered to sing the first 3 lines of How Great Thou Art aloud and repeated. And I have no idea why I do it. It's a great song, but it has no personal affinity to me whatsoever. I don't know why. It just happens. In fact, nowadays, sometimes the only reason I know that I'm feeling afraid is because I'm singing the song. The first time it happened was while I was on a plane, and as it was taking off, there was some turbulence. I didn't even know I was doing it until I saw other passengers stare at me strangely. Now it happens every single time I fly. It happens when there's a loud crash of thunder unexpectedly. It happens when there is load shedding at night. And it happens almost every single time I drive with Louise. It is not just her incredible preaching that has developed my faith and prayer life. It is her driving too, out of necessity. The fear does strange things to us. The most recent place that I've discovered myself singing that song is in a very unexpected place. It happens daily as I hang the washing. If any of you know me, you'll know that I am absolutely petrified of snakes. In fact, even the thought of those slithery serpents causes chills to run up my spine. I despise snakes. If I see a snake on the TV, my feet find their way onto the couch without me even processing it. It just happens naturally. I am so terrified. About a month or 2 ago, I was sitting outside with Yaku in our complex, which happens to be in the middle of a very built-up complex in a very built-up suburb with very busy roads. And out of paranoia, I asked these words to him. I said, "What are the chances of a snake being in our garden?" And he just laughed it off, reminding me that I'm being absolutely paranoid again and that I should just learn to relax a bit in my own space. Exactly 1 week from that moment, the lady who runs our complex admin posted in the WhatsApp group asking this question: "Has anyone traveled outside of the province recently? Because today we found a boomslang in my neighbor's yard." Hanging washing used to be simple. Hanging washing used to require a lot less fear and dread. Hanging washing never used to require me to first survey the land, put on tackies and long pants, and give myself a pep talk. But fear is so restricting. And that is why I'm so thrilled to be talking about Daniel, because he just gives us a completely other perspective. Daniel lived his life outside of the confines of fear. We see it clearly through every aspect of his life. We see it as he refuses to take the king's choice food and wine, knowing that there may be a consequence. We see it as he boldly prays at an open window, knowing that there would be a cost to his devotion. We see it as he chooses to interpret the king's dream and speak the harsh truth instead of a comfortable lie, knowing that if his words caused offense, he could lose his position and possibly even his life. And we see it as he valiantly walks into the den of lions without ever giving a cry or complaint. Daniel lived fearlessly. And he had many reasons to be afraid. We heard so wonderfully from Louise last week that Daniel didn't exactly have a carefree existence. He was ripped from his home when he was just a teenager and forced to live in unfamiliar circumstances among strangers as an outcast, with a different language and a different culture, to serve a foreign king. And what makes matters worse is that Daniel was surrounded by people who wanted nothing more than to see him fail because they were motivated by jealousy. And so they schemed and plotted to cause his downfall. And yet, Daniel seems to rise above every time. He never once gives in to fear. He never once lets fear paralyze him. He isn't confined or controlled by fear. He does not allow fear to dictate his plans, distort his perception. He doesn't allow fear to have any power over him at all. It would have been safer if he chose to just accept the gift of the king's food. It would have been safer if he just chose to pray behind closed doors. It would have been safer if he chose to just blend in and look like the people around him and not live his life so distinctively. It would have been safer to plead for mercy and beg for forgiveness instead of being thrown into that den of lions. It would have been safer and probably quite alluring, because that's what fear does. Fear tempts us into living a lesser life. Fear distorts our perspective and causes us to live safely. It changes the way we exist in the world. Fear triggers our biological response to run away or to fight. Fear paralyzes us, and it hinders us from living the big, bright, and bold life that God ordained for us when He created us. But the thing is, fear didn't change Daniel's life, didn't change Daniel's destiny. Fear didn't change his agenda at all. And I believe it's because Daniel chose to respond to fear differently. Because fear is inevitable. Being fearless doesn't mean that we have to try and avoid fear, because that will be impossible. Feeling afraid is a consequence of living in the world. Feeling afraid is a consequence of being human. It's part of our biological makeup. It's a primitive emotion that triggers us and alerts us to the presence of danger. And it can be very helpful. It is good to proceed cautiously while driving in a thunderstorm. And it's good to avoid touching a hot stove. Living fearlessly doesn't mean we live recklessly. Living fearlessly simply means we choose not to allow fear to define us or control us. Being afraid doesn't mean we are cowards. Being afraid doesn't mean we are weak. Being afraid simply means we are human. And when we feel afraid, we have to choose to respond. Daniel lived fearlessly even though he experienced fear. He experienced fear. In fact, if we read in Daniel chapter 4, we will see that there was this moment in his life where the king asks him to interpret a dream. And when he interprets it, he is terrified because he realizes that this is not something the king would want to hear. And in fact, it would be dangerous to offer the interpretation to the king. We read this in Daniel 4. Upon hearing this, Daniel was overcome for a time, frightened by the meaning of the dream. I wish the events foreshadowed in this dream would happen to your enemies, my Lord, and not to you. Daniel experienced fear, but he responded to it differently. He didn't run away, avoid, or hide, or in this case, lie. He responded to fear with courage. He responded to fear with courage. You see, he felt fear, and what I love so much about this verse is it kind of gives us a clue as to how to live fearlessly, even in the midst of fear, because he felt fear. The verse does not say he was overcome by fear. The verse says he was overcome by fear for a moment. He was overcome for just a moment, and then he moved through fear and chose courage and interpreted the dream anyway. And courage is something we all have access to. Courage is not an emotion. And courage isn't a personality trait that only some people get to have. Courage is a decision. And it's a decision that can literally only be made in the face of fear. There would be no point of courage if we were never afraid. And if we want to live fearlessly as Daniel did, then we need to learn to choose courage even in the moments of absolute terror and fear. We see characters all throughout Scripture in moments of fear choosing courage, even though they may not feel very courageous. We see it in Gideon as he chooses to be seen and step out of that cave, even when it felt safer to hide. When he chose to be seen when it felt safer to hide. We see it in Daniel when he steps forward onto that battlefield when it would have been safer to just remain still and keep quiet. We see it in Daniel when he chooses to speak up when it would have been safer to remain silent. And we see it in Jesus after a night of agonizing prayer, how he chooses to walk out of that garden towards the cross instead of away from it. Courage is a choice. Courage is a choice. Another reason I believe that Daniel was equipped and enabled to live fiercely is because he knew God so intimately. In fact, I believe that it's because of his knowledge of the character of God that he was actually enabled to choose courage every single time. He knew that God was his sustenance, which is why he could courageously choose to eat only fruit and vegetables, because he knew that God, the provider, would give him the strength he needed. He knew that God was his equipper and faithful, which is why he could step out in faith and choose to interpret the king's dream, knowing that God would fill him with wisdom and knowing that God would never let him down. He knew that God was his protector, which is why he could valiantly walk into the den of lions, knowing that God would rescue him. Daniel knew that God was sovereign and almighty and all-powerful and in control, which is why he could pray prayers like he did in chapter 2. Praise the name of God forever and ever, for he has all wisdom and power. He controls the course of world events. He removes kings and sets up other kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the scholars. Daniel knew God. Therefore, he could trust God. Daniel knew God. Therefore, he could trust God. And if we are to be equipped to live fearlessly, we too need to intimately know that he is trustworthy and true. If we are to live fearlessly in the times that we are walking through, And we are living in very ambiguous times, and every single day we are given 1,000 reasons why we should be afraid. Every single day, 1,000 reasons are placed before us why we should be terrified, why we should choose to be confined and restricted. And if we want to live outside of the constraints of fear, then we need to fill our hearts and our minds with another reality, with another truth. That though there may be 1,000 reasons to fear, there's a truth that is even greater, and that is simply this: He is who He says He is. And He can do what He says He can do. And because of that, we can live free from the restraint of fear. A few weeks ago, Louise reminded us of a really important question Jesus asked His disciples at Caesarea Philippi. And I believe that our ability to live fearlessly lies very strongly in our ability to answer that question this morning. And that is simply this: who do you say I am? May we remember this morning that He is Yahweh Rapha, the God who heals, because He actually desires to heal us. He is Yahweh Shalom because He has the power to bring peace that is more powerful than any of our anxious worries and fears. He is El Roy, the God who sees, because He wants us to know that He is never far away. He wants us to know that we are known by Him. He wants us to live with the assurance that we are seen by Him, and that because of that, we never have to cry a single tear without Him. He is God, our banner, because He is mighty to save and able to protect us from any enemy. And He is Elohim, because He wants us to live with the awareness and the confidence that comes from the awareness that He is in control, that He is sovereign, and that we have no reason to fear. We have no reason to fear. To trust God this way, to trust that He is who He says He is, and that He can do what He says He can do, means that we have to trust Him very deeply. And trust isn't something that can be willed into existence. Trust is the product of a deepening relationship. Daniel could know God this way because Daniel trusted God deeply. And the reason he trusted God deeply is because he cultivated trust daily. If we want to live fearlessly, not only do we have to choose courage, and not only do we have to know that God is who He says He is, and that He can do what He says He can do, but we need to choose to cultivate trust daily. Daniel spent all of his time consuming the scriptures, filling himself with a knowledge of who God is, allowing the promises of God to flood his heart and mind. Scriptures reveal that he spent time with God 3 times a day, asking for help, giving thanks and praise. He went to God all the time. He cultivated this trust by growing a deep, deep relationship with his king. And because of that, he could live fearlessly. Daniel ultimately teaches me that it is possible to cultivate an environment on the inside that is unaffected by the circumstances on the outside. He teaches me that it is possible to cultivate an inner life that remains unshaken even when everything around me is falling apart. And we do this by deepening our relationship with God. Jesus reminds us that man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. What this alludes to is that it is not just our physical bodies that need sustenance and strength, but our souls crave food too. When we are weary and afraid, When we live life restricted by fear, it is not because we do not have faith. Because faith is a gift that God has given all of us. It is because our faith is malnourished. And if we want our faith to be strengthened so that we too can live fearlessly, then we need to learn to feed our faith daily. And we feed our faith by feasting on His words and consuming His promises. We feed our faith by determining to implement disciplines in our life that enable us to spend time with God daily. What Daniel ultimately teaches me is that fearlessness is not a personality trait. Fearlessness is simply a fruit of our devotional life. Fearlessness is a fruit of our devotional life. It is a direct consequence of spending time with Jesus. And I pray that you and me will learn to do this as we continue in our Lenten journey. I pray that as we journey towards that cross, that we will begin to know Him more fully, trust Him more deeply, and meet with Him more regularly, so that fear will no longer determine our next step, but faith will. Amen.
Now unto Him who is able